Good morning and welcome to this SR Goel Centenary Conference that will last 2 days. I'm Ramesh Rao, speaking from Columbus, Georgia. It is late night here, but we have presenters and attendees stretched across the world. And so my welcome to all of you. I teach communication here at Columbus State University, but today I present myself in the role of the editor of India Facts that is honored and privileged to host this conference. It is a privilege because clearly Shri SITARAM Goel was one of India's most perceptive of observers in the 20th century, both in terms of his living present and a very trenchant observer of India's past. We want to celebrate his life, and we are privileged to have a wonderful set of speakers over the next 2 days who will offer us glimpses, but also their own experience working with a person who has been ignored by the mainstream and entrenched academia in India, but who is acknowledged as the person who has inspired so many. My task today is very simple. It is to first welcome you and then to introduce our moderator for the conference, Sushant Ganguly, who is from the Rashtam School of Public Policy. And Sushant himself, as a learner at Rashtam School and a keen observer of the works of SITARAM Goel, he will guide the presentations. What he will do is to get both the panelists and the attendees to observe the protocols necessary to hold this virtual conference. So please make sure to listen to Sushant's instructions and make sure that you relax and enjoy as our wonderfully expert speakers present to us, offer us glimpses into the life and work of SITARAM Goel. So with that, Sushant, the screen is yours.
Namaskaram to everyone and a very, very good morning from here in Sonipat, Haryana, where I'm currently right now. Let me welcome you all to this very, very important and very, very crucial conference on SITARAM Goel. I would be starting with introducing Dr. Koenraad Elst, and then we would be understanding how the conference goes and what are the speakers involved in the first session of the conference. And I thank you, and I would like to thank India Facts and Nick Academy for this very, very prestigious opportunity so that I can be the moderator of this session. Dr. Elst does not require any introduction, but for the sake of it, he has been a very important and a crucial inspiration for all of us. And I feel his work, his life has inspired young learners like me to understand the civilizational cause and importance of Sanatana and Hindutva in this whole context. He lives in Belgium. He's an Oriental philologist and a historian. And most of his work centers around political journalism and been a part of the Belgian Senate and a visiting professor in Indo-European studies and also at various Indian universities. But his main vocation has been always independent research and writings. He has authored more than 30 books and also a very, very important proponent of the Aryan invasion theory. And his work has been very, very crucial in demystifying and debunking the Aryan invasion theory in its whole sense. Apart from that, his books on Hindutva, his books on the civilizational aspirations and political aspirations are very, very crucial. Now I would request Koenraad ji to introduce the other speakers.
Yes, good morning all. So this morning we're going to introduce the life and works of SITARAM Goel. At first I will give a general introduction and then we will hear testimonies from Harish Chandra, his nephew, and from Shrikant Alageri, one of his authors. So I'm going to give a little PowerPoint to make it more visible. So he called his publishing house that some of us have worked at The Voice of India. That name is a story in itself. Well, at least not a story of anecdote, but ideological issue. You see, very often the word India is nowadays used as an escape clause from the ugly word Hindu. Indeed, many Hindu activists these days shun the word Hindu and use India instead. Like I know myself, I launched the term decolonizing the Hindu mind. And now I find seminars and so on being organized under the title decolonizing the Indian mind. Now, in the case of SITARAM Goel, this escape clause was not needed. He spoke his mind quite frankly. And so when he meant Hindu, he said Hindu. In this case, the term Voice of India simply implies that India is naturally Hindu. And so in a number of situations, the word India can indeed pass as meaning Hindu. Like, for example, if here in Brussels, the embassy organizes some exhibition on Indian art, everybody knows that Hindu art is meant. And that's usually the case also. So this Voice of India is an acceptable name for the voice of Hinduism. And that's what indeed it has been in his work. So SITARAM Goel was born in the village of Chhara, which is in Jhajjar district in Haryana, bordering Delhi from the west, on 16th of October 1921, which is 100 years ago exactly. And for the astrologers among you, it was in the evening at 8:34. So he belonged to the merchant Agarwal caste, yet in his case that didn't imply wealth. He told me himself, you see the circumstances in which he grew up, that, for example, he didn't have a proper arrangement in school. Fortunately, his teachers allowed him to stay there sometimes. He was exposed to Vaishnavism, to much reading of the Mahabharata, and the devotional poetry of a local 18th century Sant, Garib Das. Then when growing up, he was much influenced by the Arya Samaj, which was very active in this northwestern region, and of Mahatma Gandhi. This counts, of course, for numerous Indians. He, in his young days, was an activist in the Gandhian movement. He studied history at Hindu College, Delhi University. And already people who knew him in his youth told me, they are mostly gone now, but they told me that already since the beginning, he was, the way I personally got to know him, as a very friendly and generous man who was always very attentive to the needs of others, and particularly of people in service positions. He would always be careful to give a tip to doorkeepers and other personnel. He made sure that a meal was provided to a driver waiting outside, and so on. In his young days, he had some friends who were to become important, like Times of India editor Girilal Jain, diplomat L.C. Jain, philosopher Daya Krishna, economist Raj Krishna. Also the arts Tsarina, as he's usually called in the Indian media, Kapila Vatsyayana. And of course, his mentor and lifelong friend, Ram Swarup. Ram Swarup started a debating forum, the Changers Club. That was a first center of activity, and indeed, I'll give a lecture on it during this conference later on. He was drawn to communism and almost became a member of the party in 1948. But under the influence of Ram Swarup and of doing something that many self-styled communists fail to do, namely reading their original literature, he became an anti-communist. And so he set up the think tank Society for the Defense of Freedom in Asia, which was the leading anti-communist think tank all over the third world. So it became famous, or it became notorious, by publishing first-hand studies. Like, for instance, there's one called Whom Shall We Believe?, in which he compares the data put out by the Indian Communist Party, which was all very favorable to the performance of Soviet and Chinese systems, and their own figures. So he was very particular about this. Before making ideological statements, he had his facts straight. He helped build the anti-communist Swatantra Party. This was a party set up by Chakravarti Gopalachari and by Minu Masani. And the idea was to have India's genuine right-wing party, what was in those days called right-wing, meaning pro-Western, anti-communist, as opposed to the Jan Sangh, which was Hindu-minded. This he was not yet, not to that extent. And indeed, the Jan Sangh at the time also felt drawn to socialism, used that kind of language, whereas this party was very explicit where it stood on the main ideological bifurcation of those days, pro or anti-communist. He indeed in 1957 stood as an independent candidate. That was an arrangement that the budding Swatantra Party had made with the Jan Sangh, so he could stand on a Jan Sangh ticket in Khajuraho. Unfortunately, he was not elected, but it's interesting to note that he was chosen especially because he was deemed to be the only one who could stand up to Nehru, who was a very bad prime minister, but a very able speaker. So meanwhile, in those 50s, he rediscovered Hindu-Buddhist spirituality. I mentioned the term Buddhist here because he did practice meditations that are usual in Buddhist circles. Like you can read his description of how he practiced this metta meditation, loving kindness meditation, where you start by feeling the positive vibrations first towards yourself and the people close to you, but ultimately also to the people hostile to you. And so in his case, this included Joseph Stalin. He wrote in that same sphere historical novels, such as Saptashila, the 7 precepts. That's about a very important scene in the Buddha's life. And indeed, at this conference, we're going to hear a lecture about it. He also made Hindi translations of classic works of philosophy, such as the Plato's dialogues about Socrates, and also about history, like a book about Shivaji. Then in 1961, he wrote a series of critical articles about Jawaharlal Nehru in The Organizer. But here the RSS leadership intervened to stop it. This was much to Goelji's surprise. He was personally quite affected at that time, he told me. And so the reason was that the RSS leadership, not that they were in disagreement with him, but they feared that if anything were to happen to Nehru, then just like had happened in reality after the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi, that the RSS would get the blame and would suffer greatly. So this they wanted to prevent. Then the Chinese invasion in India in 1962 changed this situation in general, because some politicians wanted to arrest him. He wasn't arrested. And then later on, when the Chinese were winning and India expected the whole Northeast to be occupied by Chinese troops, then he was asked by the government to lead a cell that would work behind the military lines to organize a resistance of India against Chinese occupation. Now, this never happened. He also had made this cooperation conditional on the abdication of Jawaharlal Nehru as prime minister, which also never happened. He left the political struggle and became active as a publisher. First of all, as an importer and exporter of books, but more and more as a publisher also. This lasted until 1981, when he retired, and he again started writing articles in Organizer and Panchajanya, which became the famous booklets of Voice of India. So Voice of India was another publishing outfit he created on that occasion. So the first series was Hindu Society Under Siege, and he opened it by a statement that more or less summed up quite well what Voice of India was to be about. Hindu society is the only significant society in the world today which presents a continuity of cultural existence. Most other societies have undergone a traumatic transformation due to the invasion and victory of latter-day ideologies. Invasion, of course, is also true for Hindu society, but the invaders have not been entirely victorious, in the sense that Hinduism came back in the 18th century, principally, well, 17th, 18th century. And so the invaders could not make a lasting impact the way they had done in the Middle East. So this counts for Christianity, Islam, and communism. Hinduism or Hindu society can meet the same frightful fate if there were no Hindu society to sustain it. Here he makes a distinction between culture as preserved in museums, which of course can survive themselves, like you have museums of Egyptian pharaonic art and so on. In that sense, Egyptian culture has survived, but not as a society. And so in Hinduism, this is not the case, but this great society is now besieged by the same dark and deadly forces. Its beneficiaries, that is to say the Hindus, are no more interested in its survival because they have fallen victims to hostile propaganda. They have developed towards it an attitude of utter indifference, if not downright contempt. Hindu society is in mortal danger as never before. So that's the diagnosis from which Voice of India started and wanted to formulate a remedy. Yet, you see, this statement that Hinduism is in mortal danger might make you think that he was an alarmist, if not even a paranoid conspiracy thinker or so. That's not the case at all. He was quite realistic. He assessed both risks and opportunities. And in particular, he saw that the enemy forces have their weaknesses too, that they are not at all invincible. So this more or less outlined the task that Ramaswarup and SITARAM Goel both would set themselves, namely to detail the history and the ideology of Hinduism's enemies, and on the positive side to show the contrast with Hindu Dharma. These books exert a certain fascination on people who read them. I have heard very many people tell this story that this completely changed their life, changed their outlook, and motivated them to also work for the Hindu cause. There was on the one hand fearless analysis of these unpleasant questions. There was also a palpable passion for the benefits of ancient Hindu Dharma and a sympathy for the contemporary real-life Hindus. It's important to stress this. You see, there are many people with, like, I know these pro-Hindu circles in the West, they do exist, but it's quite theoretical. You see, they know the Vedas, they know the Gita, but they don't mesh very well with real-life Hindus. And whereas you see people who come to India regularly, like I have done, are impressed with very positive qualities of real-life Hindus. They're very friendly, hospitable, and so on. Yes, there are also downsides, like you have to be a lot more business savvy than in the West, where people follow rules. You know, you have to stand up for yourself a lot more in India. But on balance, it's very pleasant to be in India. Like it has been said, I think by this Egyptian writer, Nawal al-Sadawi, that everybody has two fatherlands, namely his own and India. So his philosophy about this whole business of argumentation, not to say polemic, is that it is necessary to wage the ideological struggle so as to avoid the physical struggle. This makes the whole project humane par excellence. It is a way to avoid physical struggle. You see some people in Wikipedia and other Indological sources have already vaguely discovered the name SITARAM Goel, and typically they describe him as an arch fanatic. You see, whereas the RSS still tried to spare Islam, he went after it. Well, yes, he went after the ideology of Islam. He did not go after the real-life Muslims. And indeed, he tried to liberate them from the grip of Islam. Goel's son Pradeep Goel, who is also no longer among us, but he said after his father's passing in 2003 about his father and Ram Swarup, they won our hearts with their minds. So he set out to see what had been right and wrong in the Hindu history, how they dealt with these threats. Some people say that Hindus are cowards, whereas Muslims are bullies. That's a famous statement by Mahatma Gandhi. Now, you see, this is a very common idea. And you hear it, for example, in Khalistani discourse, where, they pride themselves, oh yeah, we Sikhs, we saved the Hindus, we beat the Mughal Empire and so on. That's historically simply not correct. That is a Pakistani and Khalistani myth. And so there is a whole story of heroic Hindu resistance against invasions. That's indeed the title of one of his books. But it has also to be noted that this came at a price. Brahmin communities were very heavily afflicted by Islamic persecution, and also simply the situation of constant oppression and warfare was not conducive to the most subtle elements of Hindu civilization, and therefore, and I quote, Hindu heroism went waste because the power of thought was not used to analyze the situation, and less so. So the society that produced Chanakya, for example, in the 20th and still 21st century, is certainly not using its resources, its intellectual resources to the extent needed. Another story, mainly in the RSS circles, is that it's all because of disunity. Now, there are, of course, cases in history that are a perfect paradigm of this analysis. For instance, in 1033, Salar Masud Ghaznavi, the nephew of Mahmud Ghaznavi, had conquered a large part of what is now Uttar Pradesh, had very probably destroyed the Ram Janmabhoomi temple a first time, because the temple that we know that the archaeologists have dug up is a temple that was built after this, around 1100. So that was already a reconstruction of a temple that had been destroyed. This must have been by Salar Masud Ghaznavi. So here Hindus were alarmed, and so a coalition was formed of a dozen different kings, like most famously the philosopher King Raja Bhoja, and they defeated Ghaznavi in the Battle of Bahraich 1033. Incidentally, a very good topic to make a movie of. But then they set out to reconquer Punjab, Lahore, which had become the Indian Muslim capital. And unfortunately, then they started dividing the spoils beforehand. You see, if we reconquer it, then who is going to take control of this and that part? And so they quarreled and the coalition fell apart and there never was such a reconquest. So yes, you see, unity is a formula for success. Disunity is not. But that is only part of the story, because where does unity come from? It's not because of, hectoring people, you have to have unity. No, unity comes automatically once you have a common enemy, which is felt to be a common enemy. If you do not see for instance, a Muhammad Ghori, who was defeated in Gujarat, who was again defeated near Delhi. And so the Hindus clearly were stronger than him. And if they had gotten together, they could have chased him out of India. But they didn't, because they didn't see this common danger of Islam that was threatening all of them. So proper vision of the situation would lead to unity when it is needed. And in fact, in the case of more recent India, this was displaced by a hostile vision, namely Macaulayism, putting on Western lenses to look at your own civilization. And it's a Marxist ideological successor. So against Islam oppressed India, but only physically, whereas these ideologies penetrated very deeply. So in their discourse nowadays, you find a very systematic attack on the Hindu defenses. Already Alexander the Great discovered that the Brahmin caste was very important, that it motivated Hindus to the strength that he experienced. The ultimate invincibility. He scored a few small victories on the side, but his troops didn't want to continue because they felt that Hindus were just too strong. Then a second line of defense found out, for instance, by Francis Xavier, the Christian missionary under the Portuguese in Goa. They found out that even after killing very many Brahmins, they were still too strong because of their decentralized social organization. The anti-caste rhetoric starts with this discovery that it was a source of strength, that it made it very difficult to convert the people. Anyway, you see, this is where it started. Today, there are all kinds of newfangled and sophisticated ways of criminalizing Hindu society. I think this is where it comes from, and so the enemy does show enough sophistication to attack Hinduism where it really hurts in the long term. A consequence that we see today is an increasing loss of self-respect, where many Hindus interiorize the criminalization that is cultivated by the enemy. But this loss of self-respect goes back farther in history. And SITARAM Goel would regularly refer to a very symptomatic event in history. In 1771, the Mughals were displaced from power by the Afghans, who had entered India in the Third Battle of Panipat. And so the Afghans were then defeated by the Peshwas. And a very paradoxical result was that they liberated the Mughal emperor. And what they could have done at that time is simply say to the Mughal emperor, well, thanks for your services, but this is it. And instead, Mahaji Sindhya, who was the most powerful man in India at the time, he prostrated before the Mughal emperor. which, by the way, was witnessed by the British residents. And you see, gave them a very good impression of the real power equation in India. So this event was very significant and very symbolic for events that took place during Goelji's own life. Or in fact, that have continued and that have gone from bad to worse ever since. Like at the moment, a prediction that he made, well, an impression that he made, but where he added that he didn't see it improve, was that the Hindu forces, not even just Hindus in general, but those who particularly swore by political Hinduism, were just losing their determination to serve Hindu interests. And so today you hear a lot of criticism on social media and on specific pro-Hindu platforms that this government is very strong. Here I don't mean militarily strong, but electorally strong. It has a very comfortable majority in parliament, and yet it remains mentally submissive to Nehruvian secularism. It doesn't change the things that the government could do in order to lift a number of discriminations that Hindus suffer in today's India. So, the critical series about Nehru and Nehruism was scrapped in 1962, we already mentioned. In 1985, the same thing happened with his new Voice of India type series. It was especially the series about Muslim separatism that somehow gave some high up the idea that this couldn't be tolerated any longer. This series about Muslim separatism is actually rather favorable to an RSS bigwig at the time, Seshadri, who had written a book about the partition of India. And so this series was actually a running comment on that booklet, but in which, of course, Goelji, as he could do, develops his own analysis of this problem of Muslim separatism. Now, he criticized the Sufis. You see, there is this common sentimental idea about Sufis as broad-minded and so on. So he shows that this is not at all the case. That passage was scrapped by the organizer editor. You know, that was the beginning, you know, that's where he started feeling there's something wrong. And so he said, yeah, but, you know, all this anti-Muslim talk that you produce, you know, we have to live with them. And so Goelji answered that, well, you see, they should learn to live with us. That's what I'm trying to do. But you see, this didn't carry much conviction. So a little bit later, he wrote about some anecdotes that had happened with this editor. And so I also knew him. I can testify to this also, that Malkani was a very nice man, was a gentleman. But you see, he had this very Hindu soft corner for, well, make-believe, for sweet stories about Islam that had little to do with reality. So, for example, he said, Muhammad once said to his wife, Hind, now initially, or incidentally, Hind was not his wife. Hind was the wife of his principal enemy, Abu Sufyan, the mayor, so to speak, of Mecca. And so she was very passionate about opposing Islam, but ultimately he conquered Mecca. And so she had to submit and she had to convert to Islam. So yes, they met, they once talked. However, this is not what he said, but which he said according to Malkani. May Allah bless the country after which you are named. Hind effectively is the Arabic for India. And it's typical for girls' names that they are named after wealth, after treasure. And so India was very much admired in Arabia. And so, yes, you see, there was this girl named Hind. But Muhammad never said such a thing. And so, you see, here again, it is Goelji who did read the originals, who did know what Islam was really about. But you see, this probably well-intended make-believe is what prevents Hindus from taking a proper realistic view of Islam. Incidentally, this Malkani himself was also sacked, which was precisely part of the, well, let's say, revenge of the RSS leadership against his having allowed Goelji to write in Organizer in the first place. So with the Sangh Parivar, Goelji developed a love-hate relationship. Now, I know that on social media, a few quotations are doing the round where he's very, well, scolding. That's not the whole picture, and especially it doesn't do justice to the fine points that are like precisely what he found troublesome in RSS performance. Like in around 1959, Ram Sarupan himself went to a lecture by the RSS chief, Golwalkar. And so he said something that so many secularists say, that so many sentimental New Agers in the West also say. Muhammad was a great prophet and Islam is a great religion. And if you experience any trouble with Muslims, it is because those Muslims themselves are great scoundrels. It has nothing to do with Islam. It is just who they are. Well, he didn't buy that. Indeed, it is exactly the opposite. Muslims are the same people as Hindus. Indeed, as Mohan Bhagwat has recently said, they have the same DNA. And why not? And if they are estranged from you and turned hostile to you, it is precisely because of Islam. So the problem is not Muslims, the problem is Islam. Yet, you see, at the same time, he always remained in touch with the Sangh Parivar. Like in 1992, he prepared a white paper on Ayodhya for the BJP. But then, on the other hand, in 1997, he also published or edited Time for Stock Taking, which is a collection of papers critical of the RSS, especially disappointed RSS men who wanted to serve Hinduism, joined the RSS, and then found that its service of Hinduism was a bit in doubt. Okay. So this tendency that he diagnosed at the time has only slided further ever since, like the recent statement by Mohan Bhagwat that India is not complete without Islam. You see, this is a really strong statement if you think of it, because it says that ancient India, well, there was something wrong with it. This Ram Rajya that even Mahatma Gandhi talked about as an ideal, as the perfect society in the past and so on, that apparently was defective because it didn't have Islam in it. Okay, so we're about to wind up. One thing that most people remember of him is his 2-volume work, Hindu Temples, What Happened to Them? So famously, it contains a list of about 2,000 cases of temple destruction, replacement of temples by mosques, or transformation of temples into mosques. None of those has been challenged since. This is very important to note. These facts are secure. You see, there's no way to cast doubt on them. This is important, as Karl Popper has said, the criterion for a scientific statement is falsification. You see, you have to show what are the criteria to show that something is false. Well, in this case, it is very simple. You go to any of these places and you show, no, there was no Hindu temple here. And so this is the Ayodhya controversy all over. Now, you see, nobody has dared to risk his reputation by saying that, let's say, the Kashi Vishwanath was never destroyed. So none of those has been challenged. That's very important. So as a historian, he has scored a very important point there. But the more important part of the book is the one that is systematically ignored, namely the analysis of the theological justification for this very ancient record of iconoclasm, and also far-reaching geographically, like the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul is another case. In fact, the Kaaba in Mecca itself is the principal example, often cited by Islamic iconoclasts, that they were only repeating what Muhammad himself had done in Mecca. So this explanation really is the key to the Ayodhya controversy. Yet it was kept out of view as much as possible in the whole Ayodhya campaign. Indeed, a few days ago, a famous leading Indian journalist told me contemptuously that his Hindu temples wasn't even included among the evidence presented to the Uttar Pradesh High Court. Well, yeah, that was on purpose. That campaign wanted to bank on the Hindu feeling for the Ayodhya temple, but without offending the Muslim community that they were courting and the secularist community that they were trying to be a part of. So today, Goel's work is indeed cited very favorably on all kinds of forums. Today there is a whole crop of new online Hindu media. Finally, Hindus have found their voice. Now it has become easy to reach people with pro-Hindu discoveries, pro-Hindu messages. So there, the name of SITARAM Goel reigns supreme. But in reality, in actual policy, it is without influence. Like, for example, this government has not, even till today, done anything about the textbook propaganda, especially the history textbooks, where the whole story of what Hinduism went through at the hands of its enemies is obscured or even denied. So it is very good, of course, it is promising that his message is at least intellectually very influential. This may lead to something eventually if Hindu society gets the time. But at any rate, it's important to see that Goel's work is not just nice, it's not just something to admire, to be impressed by. It's really something meant for implementation. It has consequences, and these consequences, in this case, are inevitable. I mean, you have to take action based on this vision, or otherwise, the feeling that Hindu society may not last forever might come true. So he was a great, he was a warner, not too pessimistic. He saw a way out, but that has to be done. You see, that doesn't happen automatically. Thank you.